Good evening, everyone. My name is Renee Lloyd, and I'm your host for this evening. I work with Northwatch. We are in Robinson Huron, Robinson Superior, the lower reaches of Anishinaabe Nation territory, and the Ontario side of Algonquin-unceded territory for the Mattawa and North territory. And I'm joining from North Bay, just outside North Bay, right where the lands of the Algonquins and Nipissing meet. So thank you very much for joining us for our first session in our 12th annual webinar series. And I'm joined this evening by Bill Knoll and Wendy O'Connor, who will be sharing with us some updates from the areas being investigated as candidate sites for the transportation, burial, and abandonment of all of Canada's high-level radioactive waste. I'm going to start just briefly with some background and context. I know this will be familiar to many, but we do continue to have new people joining the conversation. So I like to each year just set the context very briefly, so everyone is part of the context. So the context is that the nuclear power industry in Canada has been producing nuclear waste for 50 years. They produce over 3 million bundles, weighing approximately 60,000 tons, and they expect that volume to double over the next 30 years. Since the 1970s, there's been a series of ideas, schemes, concepts for the burial of highly radioactive nuclear fuel waste deep below the surface. It started in the 1970s, 3 men, 3 months, produced the Hare report. It went from there to a Atomic Energy of Canada Limited site search and site investigations in the 1980s. That led to a geological disposal concept, which went through an environmental assessment review hearing in the 1990s, which ended with the panel finding that the ACL concept had not demonstrated itself to be safe and acceptable. That was the question to the panel. Has the Atomic Energy of Canada Limited geological disposal concept been demonstrated to be safe and acceptable? And their answer was no. Very detailed, but in summary, no, it had not been demonstrated to be safe and acceptable. They made a number of excellent recommendations around next steps. The federal government thanked them, said they accepted those in principle, but in practice, through the Nuclear Fuel Waste Act in 2002, gave the green light to the nuclear waste generators and owners to create an organization they called the Nuclear Waste Management Organization. And that organization in 2005 recommended something they call adaptive phase management, which has as its end goal the centralization, the burial, the processing, the burial, and then the abandonment of all of Canada's high-level waste in a single location. So it's a very familiar concept. Goes back to the ACL concept, 2005, slightly, significantly actually different, because they said any rock will do. ACL had limited their search to the Canadian Shield, to the crystalline rocks, and ACL and Nuclear Waste Management Organization expanded the site search area to include the sedimentary rocks of southwestern Ontario and other regions, but southwestern Ontario is where the other candidate site is situated. One in the northwest in crystalline rock, one in the southwest in sedimentary rock. So you can see that the concept has evolved, the drawings have changed over time, but it's still basically bury, abandoned, bury and abandon. This is a concept or an idea that's got some carriage in several different countries. Sweden, Finland are the two that the industry and government in Canada refer to the most, because they also have selected the site. They also have, in Finland and Sweden, an application in the process of being reviewed, an application for a license to operate, but there has been no deep geological repository for high-level fuel waste approved or brought into operation anywhere in the world, despite more than 50 years of effort by the nuclear industry. So now we're going to, just at a fairly quick pace, go through the NWMO's year in review. And then we're going to turn to Bill and Wendy to give us an update on what's happening in each of the areas that are being studied as candidate sites. So we'll start with the reporting and NWMO's posted report. There's been a major overhaul to the Nuclear Waste Management Organization website, and it's not been a positive. Search functions are greatly reduced. There's extensive link rot, including from NWMO's 2023 reports, such as the triennial report. So you click on a link, doesn't open, you get a 404 message. And the site search has been shown to not yield reports that we know are there on the website. For example, I did a search in the general search function for the technical program for long-term management of Canada's used fuel. No results. Did the same search for a shortened name, technical program annual report, got 2 results, neither of which led to the report that we know is there. So this is an additional challenge. The challenge is that it's very difficult to track and access the NWMO's current work, both their social studies and their site investigations and their technical work. And the changes to the website, the more limited search functions, make that even more difficult to really remain engaged and familiar with the NWMO's program and their process. They say that they're a transparent organization. They claim that they are looking for an informed and willing community. Presumably they want an informed and willing public. It's very difficult to be informed when you can't access the information that they are producing. So there are a number of reports produced this year. You now have to search for them by category: technical reports, social reports, corporate reports, funding, background and brochures. And then there are a limited number, actually only 1 new report posted in the citing areas. We're going to look a little more closely at some of these, particularly the more general reports that give an overview of the NWMO's program. And 2 in particular we look at each year. One is the annual report, or every 3 years, it's the triennial report that reports on the year past, and in the case of the triennial report, to some degree reflects on the 3-year period. And then the implementing adaptive phase management, their implementation plans, and this year the implementation plan was embedded in the triennial report. Other years it has been separate. So I'm going to look at just a couple of highlights, particularly from the triennial report and the implementation report. And one highlight, or perhaps, yes, I'll call it a highlight. One highlight is the emphasis on their what comes next. And what comes next for the NWMO, immediately they're intending to select a site and announce that selection of their preferred area this year. And they said that in 2023, and it took till August for them to delay to the following year, but fresh into 2024, they're still saying 2024. They say once a preferred site has been selected in 2024, they will then be moving quite directly to the licensing and impact assessment process. And there's lots of evidence of this outside the NWMO information sources as well, although perhaps it is an information source from the NWMO, albeit indirectly. We see that they have been posting many requests for proposals on the Bidding Go, which is a website where corporations such as in the NWMO post requests for proposals. And some of those are very directly, very specifically looking for consulting firms to be undertaking the work for the impact assessment and the licensing process. And this is just one example of that, but there are many, many signals that they are already in the process, they are already preparing their impact assessment documents and preparing their licensing documents before the site has been selected. And in the implementation report or implementation plan, that message is reinforced, and we can see that they've got a number of categories of activities, all geared to the post-site selection phase. First, identify the single prepared site, and then undertake the work for impact assessment and licensing, engineering, site assessment, safety, mobilization, which is this notion that the NWMO staff will actually relocate to their selected site. Regulatory decision-making process is a very big item, partnership, and then additional work on transportation. So how are they going to pay for this? Well, Ontario ratepayers' money. And we'll look at what they had in 2022 in their budget. It was $136 million, $757,915. That was the 2022 budget. But if you look ahead at the coming years, you'll see up by 2025, that's next year, over $500 million in the NWMO budget. 94% of the NWMO budget comes from Ontario ratepayers. So that is your hydro bill, electricity bill at work. So who's who in the NWMO? Who's doing, carrying out these implementation plans and so on? We have on the screen the executive committee. So these are the president, vice presidents of the key areas. Out in the siting regions, we don't see these people very often. But these are the people who are at the, top of the ladder. Lori Swamy does go to the siting regions from time to time. And Lise Morton, she's the vice president for siting. Lisa Frizzell, vice president communications. Chris Boyle, vice president for engineering. Derek Wilson used to be vice president for DGR design and now is overall chief operating officer. And Bob Watts, who is VP for Indigenous. Alan Webster, VP for regulatory affairs. Each of these people has a large crew working under them. And some of those we do see from time to time in the siting regions. Then we have the NWMO Board of Directors. The Board of Directors is majority occupied by Ontario Power Generation appointees and majority controlled by Ontario Power Generation. The Nuclear Waste Management Organization Social Advisory Committee is an entity that I don't think we have ever seen in the siting region. But these are the folks giving the NWMO advice on social issues. So it is curious that the Social Advisory Committee is in a complete disconnect with the public and including with the public in the two siting regions that have candidate sites. And then we have a large group on the screen, and this is the Indigenous Youth and Elders Council. And what the NWMO depicts is all the members from 2012 to 2022. And from the NWMO information sources, I was unable to determine who actually is the current membership. Then the NWMO has a handful of what they call review groups, peer review groups. The Council of Knowledge Keepers is what how they now refer to the Indigenous Youth and Elders Council. Then there's a municipal forum, no information available. The Environmental Review Group is a group of 3 that do meet several times, and their reports are available for the last 2 years, not through the link in the triennial report, but separately. They are findable on the NWMO website with some effort. And they have met multiple times and had at least one in-person meeting in 2022. There's the geoscientific review group, which has not posted a report. It's a group of about 6, not posted a report in the last 2 years. Then there's a curious entity called the Site Selection Review Group, which I had not heard of until this year's triennial report. And this is made up of 2 individuals, Tom Isaacs, who some would have met in his many visits to the siting regions, and someone from SKB, the Swedish proponent for the Deep Geological Repository in Sweden. No information available about what they do, how they do it, no annual reports, but they are nevertheless identified as a peer review group for the NWMO. And then there's a community-based transportation working group, also no information available other than a small post on the NWMO website, which makes it sound very much like this group is at the idea stage. No information about its composition, its meetings, the products it's provided to the NWMO, and it is possible that this is something that was included in the triennial report as something that they're intending to do, but does not yet actually operate. Certainly a community-based transportation working group is a working group that you would expect that there would be a public component to that. We have millions of people and hundreds of communities along the transportation route. It will be certainly interesting to hear a response to my inquiry to the NWMO about the composition of the transportation working group. So timelines, we touched on this a little bit in some of the earlier graphics, but the timelines are, again, 2024 preferred site, 2025 they begin work on the impact assessment and the licensing process. They are predicting that in 2028 their impact assessment studies will be submitted. They are already in a discussion and have been for some years now with the Impact Assessment Agency. We know this only through access to information requests. They also are in an ongoing relationship with the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission and that service agreement. So the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission staff time is paid for by the Nuclear Waste Management Organization through their service agreement. So when you see a CNSC member attending a community event, a conference in South Bruce, the forum in Dryden last year or in Ignace, those CNSC staff time are being paid for by the NWMO through their service agreement, as is all CNSC staff time. So the preparatory work is certainly already well underway from the NWMO's perspective with both the Impact Assessment Agency and the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. And they are estimating 2030 is the time when the impact assessment will be approved, which would be a very rapid turnaround for the impact assessment review process. And then they anticipate just 2 years later, the license to construct would be granted, and then construction would begin the year after that. Interesting ideas, not realistic timelines in comparison to other projects that we've seen go through review processes. Many delays, I think most, if not all of them, proponent requested or proponent caused, but nevertheless, these are very shorter, much shorter timelines than we've seen in any even somewhat comparable experiences like Ontario Power Generation's Deep Geological Repository for low and intermediate level waste, failed and now withdrawn, or the review for the near surface disposal facility, the large on-surface landfill for low level radioactive waste on the Ottawa River, which as of today is subject to 2 different judicial reviews following its approval by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission last month. Then they anticipate or they predict beginning operations from 2040 to 2045. They did in an earlier document in the 2021 transportation concept outline their end time for transportation to the site, which they had clocked at 2088. That will certainly be revised if the announcement last week by Ontario that they are going to proceed with or allow Ontario Power Generation to proceed with the refurbishment of Pickering, which will generate 5 million, 500,000 additional bundles, additional to the 5.5 million earlier predicted by the NWMO. And it changes the timeline from the last fuel leaving the site at Pickering from 2050 to the last fuel leaving the site at approximately 2105. That's our own calculation based on operating time, storage time in wet storage, storage time in dry storage. So these numbers certainly will be affected. The NWMO's entire operation will be affected by a refurbishment, which is outside any of the numbers previously calculated. Same would be the case with the small modular reactor that Ontario Power Generation is pursuing for the Darlington site. So just a couple of slides on siting process and studies. So we have a 9-step siting process, came out in 2010. This outline is no longer on the NWMO process, but on the NWMO website. But I think it's helpful to just set out some of the previously established milestones, NWMO established milestones. For example, by the point we're at now, they would have established what they call a center of excellence in their in the candidate site in the preferred community, and they would initiate regulatory processes. The prediction still holds that they're waiting to confirm acceptance, willingness. That's called now referred to as the willingness process or the willingness project. And Wendy and Bill will talk more about that shortly. So that's our siting process. On the NWMO website, there's not a lot of new activities being posted around the siting process, which is interesting itself. For the South Bruce area, there are no new activities identified for 2023. So now in early 2024, I looked back for 2023, no new activities posted. They have all of the journeys so far, the listing of activities to date, no new activities identified. And in the Ignace area, the only new activity listed for 2023 is the release of a summary of some community studies that were done in 2022 and earlier. So not a lot of transparency there in terms of activities in the siting areas. In the Ignace area, in the South Bruce area, there is still an active community liaison committee that still has an active website and still meets regularly. That is not the case in Ignace. The community liaison committee is being transported into a willingness Ignace community liaison committee. There were apparently some new members named. Then the committee was suspended. The website is static with a message saying it's being updated. So pretty limited windows into the NWMO activities in the siting areas through NWMO corporate. So the technical program, NWMO assumed the technical program from Ontario Power Generation in 2007. And they've had a fairly active technical program through the years. And I've just got on the screen a list of the reports released and including the technical reports. For 2023, the year we're looking at, there were only 7 technical reports released or as posted and as categorized by the NWMO. Although there were 2 reports listed one as corporate and one as a backgrounder and brochure, which in previous years would have been identified as technical reports. One being the annual report of the Environmental Review Group, and the other being the watching brief on advanced fuel cycles, basically watching reprocessing and small modular reactors. Interesting, for the first year in many, many years, the nuclear fuel waste projections in Canada, that inventory was not published in 2023. The watching brief on fuel cycles, as indicated, does not appear in the search for technical documents. So the main technical report, or the main source of information for the technical report, for the technical work, is the 2022, the annual report on the 2022 technical program, which was released in May 2023. Another difficulty in following the technical program with the NWMO and staying current with their activities is that we're pretty much always a year behind. They're releasing a summary report, sometime into the, they'll sometime into 2024, they'll release the report for 2023, and so on. But here are some of the key points from, and this is just my quick shopping list from the 2022 technical program. So routing studies, so which route they will take for their transportation. A very interesting project, White Shell Fuel Transfer Project, will use the used fuel transportation package for what they're calling mixed fuel types. This is high-level waste at the White Shell facility in Manitoba, which they intend to ship to Chalk River, leave it in storage there before they would then again ship it to their intended burial site, using their supposition, not mine. So the NWMO is looking at doing additional work to expand allowable contents of the used fuel transportation package. The used fuel transportation package is the certified package which both the Nuclear Waste Management Organization and the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission point to as their certified package. They often talk about it in the context of discussing the safety testing that it has to go through. There's the fire test, the drop test, the immersion test. True access to information requests from 2021. We got the responses in 2023. We learned that the used fuel transportation package has in fact not been subject to full-scale testing. In the 1980s, the used fuel transportation package was subject to some half-scale tests, which were not complete and not fully successful, and some 1/7 scale tests. But the used fuel transportation package has not been subject to full-scale testing. And we also learned through the access to information request that it is not required to go through actual real-world tests for the fire and immersion tests, despite that they're being described that way by the CNSC and the NWMO when they talk about the rigorous international standards for testing transportation packages. Those can actually be approved on the basis of calculation. So it's that same used fuel transportation package which the NWMO is going to work with Canadian nuclear laboratories to use to transport high-level waste from Manitoba to Chalk River. The NWMO, moving on to other technical work they've launched, there's a contract launched to support licensing and impact assessment work. Potential vendors have hosted a workshop for the NWMO on automated processes in the used fuel packaging plant. There's a full-scale emplacement trial. There was a lot of media coverage of this when the NWMO demonstrated that their forklift can actually stack 2 buffer boxes on top of each other in a structure which they describe as replicating or resembling a cavern in the eventual deep geological repository. It, the scale is completely different. The materials are completely different. but I guess the shape perhaps was similar to allow them to demonstrate that they could stack the buffer boxes one on top of each other. The literature review of head spring construction, they did some work on the underground layouts, lots of studies on copper corrosion, corrosion studies, microbial studies, and a number of studies on rock properties, other geoscience studies, and some studies done on dose rates to update their fuel waste characterization. So just a final note, here are some of the reports that we didn't see. We didn't see in 2023 any updates to the concept reports for both the transportation system and the Deep Geological Repository. The Deep Geological Repository concept report is the only substantive description we have of the used fuel packaging plant, and it was very preliminary, very conceptual in 2021 when it was released. We also haven't seen any update to the reference case. Over a couple of decades, there were a series of reference cases or case studies prepared and released, starting with ACL in 1994, moving up to the NWMO's second case study or safety assessment report in 2018 for the sedimentary rock formation, and we've seen no updates on those. So that is our technical summary. And now we're going to move on to talking about the two locations the NWMO is studying.
Renee, there's a couple of questions in the chat. One was they cannot find the mute button, so they were wondering whether they're muted automatically.
They are muted automatically, and so yeah, thanks for that, Bill. Thanks for jumping in. So everyone is muted, and questions need to go in the Q&A, and we'll look at the Q&A when we get done Wendy and Bill's presentation. Anything else, Bill, that caught your eye?
Well, there was one question on the timeline slide, and it was whether the Canadian Nuclear Safety staff are paid by the NWMO.
Yes, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission staff are paid by they're not paid directly by the NWMO. The NWMO has a service agreement with the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, and they are paid through that transfer of funds from the NWMO to the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. So thanks for that, Bill. And everyone is muted, and the hands up function doesn't actually work in the webinar mode. My apologies. So our locations. So we have South Bruce in southwestern Ontario, and the Rebel site in northwestern Ontario. So I think we're going to start with Bill. Bill, I think, I'll just tell you briefly. We're going to have a conversation. So Bill and Wendy are each going to give us an introduction to their site, to their region and the candidate site there. And then we're going to go through a bit of a conversation, exploring these other questions you have up on the screen. So Bill, over to you.
Right.
And I'll move to your first slide, and you just tell me when you want the next one.
All right, I'll do that. Well, before I get to that slide, I'll just talk a little bit about South Bruce. And South Bruce is the gateway to Bruce County. It's an area of rolling hills, scenic highways, and warm-hearted people. And I really mean that. The people in South Bruce are great people to live with and to be associated with. South Bruce is really made up of three major communities. There's Miami, Teeswater, and then Formosa. Miami and Teeswater population is about 1,000 each, and Formosa is a little bit smaller. There's a lot of German roots throughout the Formosa and the Miami community, and the roots really extend into the countryside of Miami, and they've been branded as a pavilion town located just south of Walkerton. They have a lot of unique generational shops, rural charm, home of the ever-flowing artesian well in the Miami Rotary Park. The people really come from great distances to take the water from that particular artesian well. And I'm going to talk about artesian wells a little bit later, about the whole drinking water situation. Teeswater is a strong agricultural community. It's the home of Gay Lee, which is a fairly large creamier operation. Actually, that particular creamery is the oldest creamy in Ontario. It was established back in 1875. So, and it's the second oldest in Canada. Teeswater has been branded as a tractor town. And if you visit Teeswater, you'll find various tractor art pieces such as repurposed antique tractor hoods and seats, and loads of the antique tractors. Teeswater was also the home of a recently retired square dancing tractor, which was an interesting part of their community center when the country fair that they have. Formosa, totally different. Formosa is really settled in the valley between two hills. It has beautiful parks. It's got a historical church and a waterfall attraction with Rolling Hill Valley located in the middle of South Bruce. And it's the home of Formosa Brewery. So if anybody drinks beer, you should try the Formosa Brewery. So I'll go to the first slide now and talk a little bit about the site itself. The site selected by the NWMO for the nuclear dump is 2 kilometers north of the town of Teeswater, and it consists of 1,500 acres of prime farmland. The site also contains several aquifers, which are the source of the drinking water for all of South Bruce. The only river in South Bruce, the Teeswater River, runs through the middle of the site and connects with the Saugeen River, which ends up flowing into Lake Huron. The Teeswater location is part of what they call the Great Lakes Basin, which supplies the drinking water for more than 40 million people. The site itself is 30 kilometers south of Lake Huron and Bruce Power. The site is also near the Greenock Swamp. Go to the next slide, if you would, Bernane. The swamp wetland complex covers about 20,000 acres of land, and this amazing ecosystem is noted for its ability to act as a great giant sponge, releasing water when periods of drought and absorbing water during heavy rainfall. The swamp also boasts a diversity and abundance of wildlife and is a home to several significant species, from the pitcher and sundew plants to bald eagles and everything in between. So go to the next slide with the Teeswater River. So that's the Teeswater River, and it flows, and that's actually a shot from where I used to live in Teeswater. And it's a very interesting river from a point of view of not only people do kayaking on the river, it's very rich in fish. There's a lot of fishing going on in that river. And it's really the only river in South Bruce. Well, so I'll go back to, with such a rich environment location and a productive farmland, did the NWO select this site based on being concerned about the impact to the environment and to the people? Or was it based on the need to acquire a parcel of land capable of accommodating their dump? You should decide that question. It appears the corporate agenda again trumped the environmental concerns and the safety of people. The South Bruce is a community of 1,580 residents, and the agricultural industry being the largest employee in the community. So that's kind of the overview of South Bruce, and a very quick overview, and on to Wendy.
Thanks very much, Bill. Wendy, I think you're going to share your own slides. So I'm going to stop share and turn it over to you.
Okay, I'll just share in just a second. I just wanted to say, Bill, I appreciated your lovely and lyrical description of the environment down there. I'm familiar with that environment. And up here as well, I don't think I have so much in my notes to talk about my connection with the environment here. Behind me is the Kaministiquia River. I live just outside Thunder Bay, and the Cam, as we call it, is of course a water course that's at risk from the transportation of this waste. So in addition to what I'm going to show you on maps, if you consider the transportation route, so much more is at risk. So I will just see if I can start my screen share.
Good luck.
Yes, good luck. Yeah, you know, I was struggling with that a little bit before. Let me know if I've got it and how it's looking. It should be a map of Eastern Canada.
It's not up yet, Wendy, but we'll give it a chance.
Okay, oh, it says my screen sharing is paused. If I click on that, nothing happens. So let's try stopping the share. It gave me a couple of choices here, bear with me.
It's always fun doing these. You never know what's going to happen. There you go. You got
You got it, Wendy.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, so this first slide here, I'll just clear some things off my desktop so I can see it. I have a question, Brennan. Can people see my cursor when I cursor over the?
Yes, we
Yes,
can.
yes, we can.
Oh, that's lovely. Oh, I like that. Okay.
The mode you're in right now, Wendy, is fine. We can see your slide. It's not slideshow mode, but it's fine. We can see it. So if it works better for you, then just go ahead.
Yeah, the Zoom controls are obscuring the controls for
Okay. Just
slide
go
share, but this will be.
see it. Yeah.
I just wanted to outline where the waste is right now and where the NW would potentially like it to go. South Bruce is down here. As many of you know, that little circle should be just a touch to the left of where it is. And then the approximate location of the Revel site up in our area in the northwest is here. And on this map, we've also noted the distances from the waste sources. Most of these are nuclear power reactors. There's the experimental reactor in Pinawa and the research facility at Chalk River, but the rest are power reactors. The waste will travel a minimum of 1,600 kilometers if it's coming from the facilities in Southern Ontario around here, but possibly, well, definitely over 2,500 kilometers from Point Lepreau out here. So when people contemplate these distances, these are the road routes approximately on here, but it could go by rail as well. But the distances are staggering, and that's one thing that tends to make people's jaws drop when they contemplate this. So I'll just get back into my notes here. Yep, the distances. I'd also like to point out, while this map is up, that Northwestern Ontario is not and has not been a consumer of nuclear generated power. Our power generation up in the Northwest is largely hydropower with the addition of some biomass and wind and some solar, which is mostly from private systems. Ontario Power Generation, our power utility, reports that fully 86% of our power in Northwestern Ontario is from hydro. In the spring of 2023, the Northwestern Ontario electricity grid, as some of you may know, was joined with the Southern Ontario grid through the East-West link. There was a very tenuous link before that, but it was only last spring that those two grids were linked up. And yet representatives of the NWMO love to tell people that as part of Ontario's grid, we all use around 60% nuclear power when we turn on the lights. But for us in Northwestern Ontario, that simply isn't so. Because of the line losses from distant generation sites, what we're using is the locally generated hydro and biomass, wind and solar. So that's one of the communications challenges we have up here, is to let people know what the differences are in our electricity sources. See if I can get my next slide for you. I don't think they're advancing. Oh, that's not the one I wanted, but at least they're moving. There we are. A bit of latency there. So are you seeing the borehole area slide? Okay. Yeah. This just zooms in a little bit. Those who tuned in last year saw this one already, but it's showing the approximate location of the potential site between Ignace and Dryden. And again, it's an older map. The area is actually right around here, so the dot should be just a little bit to the left. It's roughly equidistant between Dryden and Ignace, and the little towns of Diamond and Denoric there, they have no special standing with the NWMO as far as consent, although quite rightly Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation as the closest Indigenous nation does have a lot of power in the consent process. As what the NWMO terms the potential host community, Ignace itself actually is just a proxy municipality in regard to its having any authority over what can or cannot happen 2 townships away. So what I'm saying is the potential site is not in the township of Ignace, although Ignace has been designated the potential host community and has a lot of power in the consent process. The demographics of the small population in the area are skewed to a somewhat older population, and the income of many residents is on the low side. There is some overt social and financial poverty in the area that we saw firsthand when a group of us from We the Nuclear Free North canvassed in Ignace last September. Another important aspect of the location is where it sits, where the potential site location sits is right at the height of land serving 2 important extensive watersheds. And here we go, my slides are working well now. The potential site happens to be at the head of 2 major watersheds, as you can see on this map. And first, I'll point out though that Ignace itself, which is right over here, the potential host community is not actually in the watershed of the project at all. They're upstream. So Ignace itself bears no risk of water contamination from this project, which calls into question again why they have so much power to decide for the rest of us. So the potential site is at this red dot, and from that location, water enters both the Turtle River watershed and the Wabigoon watershed. So if you follow the arrows, the waters in the Turtle River watershed swing down just west of Atikokan, which is down here, you can't see it, run across into the Rainy River watershed, and then continue north through the Lake of the Woods watershed and north to Kenora. And just north of Kenora, those waters enter the Winnipeg River that eventually runs into Lake Winnipeg, predictably enough. And I just want to pause here at Lake of the Woods. As anyone who's been up here, holidayed here, knows people here, they will know that this is an immense conglomeration of inlets and islands and open water. It's also peopled by around 15 Indigenous communities, Kenora at the top. If this were to become contaminated, it affects the lives of thousands of people, not to mention the environment there. So when you're in Southern Ontario and you look on a map and it just looks kind of remote and you think there's a lot of trees and water, well, those of us here on this meeting know there's always more to it than that. There's the people that are living there. Waters in the Wabigoon watershed take a more direct route basically to get to the same place. So if we go up here again, the waters in this watershed run down into Dryden, past Grassy Narrows First Nation, through a series of lakes and rivers, and again over to the Winnipeg River and on towards Winnipeg. So of course, potential contamination of these waterways would be catastrophic to people living there, and the mere presence of a nuclear waste facility could have a very detrimental effect on tourism, especially on hunting and fishing tourism. And that's my slide for the end of our talk. So I think that's my first bit, Bernane, just a background of the area that we have up here.
Thanks very much, Wendy. That was great. Excellent. Thanks to both Bill and Wendy. And now we're going to go to our next part, where we're going to have a conversation with Bill and Wendy about these candidate areas And we're going to be very casual, although I did check the time and see that I took up more than I was allotted, which has put us a little bit behind schedule. But I think I'll stop the share and I'll ask Bill and Wendy, how is willingness? So the NWMO says that they are only going to proceed with an informed and willing community. So how is that being measured or determined in each of your communities? I don't know. Bill, if you want to start first, how does the NWMO say they're going to measure willingness, and who do they count as being part of the people who need to say they're willing or not?
Well, first of all, there was a question in the chat about willingness and what's the definition that NWMO is giving for how do they determine willingness. They've never given a definition on how they're going to determine that. They say that's a responsibility of the communities to determine whether you're going to be willing. And in our case in South Bruce, I'm going to go into a bit of background about how we got to the council to agree to a referendum. So we started way back in 2020, aggressively pursuing the need for a referendum. We wanted to make sure that the citizens and residents of South Bruce would have a voice in deciding whether they wanted to become a willing host community. There was no indication from our council or mayor that such an activity would be part of it. It wasn't decided how willingness was going to be determined by them. We did not want this decision to be made by a small group of people, namely the council, because we believe that this is a forever decision. So for the community, it's going to exist for thousands and maybe even millions of years. And associated with that is a liability for our future generations. So to get the South Bruce Council to finally agree to conduct a referendum, we went out and had a petition. We walked door to door. We had 1,700 people sign this petition, which is more than 70% of the eligible voters in the community. But that wasn't good enough. South Bruce also wanted to hire a consultant to determine, what did the residents want. So the report from the consultant came back saying, yeah, they want a referendum. And, that still took several meetings with the council to actually get them to agree. However, in the petition, we were looking for the referendum to occur coincident with the municipal election in 2022. They decided, no, that wasn't going to happen. And their agreement was again to delay because they felt as though the residents needed to know what benefits the community would receive in return for accepting the waste from the NWMO. So they are working on what they call a draft hosting agreement between the NWMO and South Bruce. And they say within that agreement, there will be identification of what the benefits to South Bruce residents will be. And in the November, this all took place the November 2022. They said that particular draft hosting agreement would be available by the end of the year, by 2023. And we don't have it yet. So the latest information from our mayor gets is that sometime in February that should be available. The next step, though, in establishing referendum is the council needs to approve a bylaw to hold a referendum for a by-election to occur. And that date, because we still don't have a draft hosting agreement available, is still not certain. But it would take 180 days after a bylaw is passed to actually hold a referendum. The wording for the question on the referendum is still not available. It's supposed to be a very, very succinct wording with only a yes and a no answer. And so we haven't seen that. The other thing, we're pushing the South Bruce Council and their staff to make sure that the actual referendum occurs as a paper ballot. We're not happy with the online process. There are several reports are available that conclude that the online approach is not private, it's not democratic, and it's prone to fraud. Now, Bernane, you did not ask Wendy and I how it would be determined that the community would be informed. And you put up a slide a little way back about the journey that's taken place in South Bruce. Well, what the NWMO has decided in an answer to a question we had proposed to them was that's going to be decided by a number of meetings, reports. So it's going to be a subjective measure. There's no way that the South Bruce Council has identified any way of which they're going to identify how the community is informed. So here we go. It's only going to be a subjective tactic by the NWMO to make that call on how informed is going to be decided. So that's kind of my overview. So we're doing a referendum sometime in 2024, yet to be decided. And you need, in a referendum, just another dimension about the referendum, you need 50% of the voters to come out. And out of those 50%, you need 50% to say yes or no. If they do say yes, it becomes a binding agreement for 4 years. But after 4 years, that can be reversed. So that's kind of the process. Give you a quick update.
And Bill, just remind me, I think that you had said in an earlier conversation, what happens if there's not 50% turnout?
Then what happens in that situation? The council gets to make the decision.
There we go.
And that's something we're not looking forward to. So we really do have to get very active and make sure that the people of South Bruce, the residents, are eligible for voting to get out and vote. It's a very important decision. It's probably the most important decision that South Bruce has ever made. And again, as I mentioned, it's a decision that's going to stay with you, with your families, and with future generations. So it's important, and we need to get out and vote.
Great. Thanks, Bill. A sobering response, but a very good response. Wendy, how about the Revel site?
Yeah.
How will willingness be determined for the Revel site?
Yeah, these decisions are so fraught in so many ways, and the characteristics of the process are are themselves fraught with complications and uncertainties. So it's a tough thing. Willingness up in our region will be determined by Township of Ignace and Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation. I don't have a lot of information on Wabigoon Lake. They're developing their process, and they'll be following that process in the near future. We had comments from members of that community that I've heard suggest that it may be a vote, but I don't think there's anything official that's come from the community. So they're still working on that. But I do have information on Ignace. And some of this you heard last year if you tuned in. But in Ignace, the current council is continuing its stance, which was held by the previous council, that it will decide on behalf of the citizens whether there's willingness or not, and the council will convey that to the NWMO. Through our group with We the Nuclear Free North, when we did our door-to-door visits to Ignace residents last fall, many told us, almost every single one, if we got on the subject of a referendum, that they did want a referendum on this, and that was what they expected, whether they were in favor or whether they were opposed. It was a chorus of voices saying, well, of course we want a referendum. But unfortunately, there doesn't seem to have been public pressure on council to change its course on this. So council, as far as we know, is still intending to decide on behalf of the citizens there. So to do that, the municipality has now hired a new consultancy firm. They've gone through one or two. The new one is there to engage with the residents and get information for council to inform council's decision. The results of the current consultation with residents will be hopefully of value to council for that purpose. The consultant's plan is, and this is where it gets convoluted and fraught, sort of. The process is going to be done mostly over an online system, and I'll get to the question that's going to be asked of residents ultimately in a minute. But there's a whole bunch of steps that residents have to complete before they get there. There's 3 cycles of questions. 2 of them have already taken place in November and January, and a final cycle will happen in March. So, for instance, a resident will have seen the ads or gotten a letter or an email back in the fall, hopefully, inviting them to register on the online system. For residents that aren't online or for whom that's impractical, the consultants do offer one-on-one in-person meetings when they're in town, so there is that option. Through the 3 engagement cycles, and at each one there are consultants in town entertaining people at the local tavern and taking them bowling or whatever you can do for the consultants to get to know the residents. The residents go through these cycles on the online system mostly, and I'm not sure what they consist of when they log in there. It's what the NWMO, when we talk about it online, representatives have called it deliberative democracy. So when we say really the residents should have a referendum, NWMO reps say, well, this is deliberative democracy, it has a give and take to it, etc. It seems so vague. But in the last engagement cycle to this whole process, which will happen in March, residents will record their final decision on the matter. And note that I've said that participants are asked at each stage to explain their choices. And that really kind of sticks in my craw. You know, if it's a referendum, you vote yes or no. Do you really want to engage in a process where people are asking you to explain your choice? You know, I'd feel that I was being asked to defend my choice to a consultant. You know, I don't know. But as one of my misgivings about this, there are quite a few, but in our door-to-door experience last fall with our organization, what we found was that many marginalized, disadvantaged, or fearful people actually oppose the repository idea. And my misgiving is that these are the very people who won't engage in this online or in-person meeting process, people that might have come out for a referendum just to cast their secret ballot, but people that won't engage in this process. But there's another problem with the process. The complication of it bothers me. But then for me, the most problematic part of the process is the nature of the final question that Ignace residents will ultimately be asked by the consultants. So in March, they will be asked to register their response of yes, no, or abstain to this statement. I support the Township of Ignace continuing to pursue locating a deep geological repository of used nuclear fuel near Ignace. So approving or disapproving the township continuing to pursue this process with the NWMO. Now, why not word that question more simply? Why not a simple yes or no to hosting the repository? But I think the oblique wording is no accident. I think the wording ultimately is the township's choice, because the townships have hired the consultants to consult and consult on the question of the township's choice. So residents who are on the fence about the issue or feel sort of negative about the repository, but positive about the current financial benefits Ignace is receiving, I think they'd be quite likely to read the question very carefully, see that they are only agreeing to the township continuing in a process, and then think, why not? And indicate a yes. Because after all, they're not saying yes to hosting the repository, they're saying yes to the township continuing in this lucrative process with the NWMO. And you know, I expect the council, which still seems by and large in favor of hosting the DGR, to interpret those yes votes as yes to being willing to host the repository. That's my fear. So sorry for the long answer to that question. That question kind of has me riled up, Renee.
Now, that was excellent, Wendy, and a very good segue into the next question, which is about that funding. So, we already looked at some of the numbers for the NWMO for last year and for next year. 134 million, I think it was last year, heading up to $250 million by 2025. Wendy and then Bill, what are you seeing in terms of the effect of that funding? A large part of that budget is for what they call engagement. Another sizable chunk is for communication. The biggest budget line is for staff and administration, which goes across all areas. But what are you seeing as how's that money showing up in the municipalities who are engaged in the process, or in the region more generally? Are there overflow dollars? Wendy, did you want to start us off, and then we'll go to Bill?
Yeah, sure thing. Translating those budget lines of the NWMO into budget lines that you may see in municipal financial reports is a complicated thing. I haven't tried to weed the whole thing out, but in our region, we're certainly seeing greater and greater investment of NWMO monetary resources in the township of Ignace and also in the city of Dryden. And other communities in the region do also have Learn More agreements. A number of Indigenous organizations and communities have those too. So funding goes out there. But similar in name to the arrangement in South Bruce, the NWMO and the Township of Ignace have a multi-year funding agreement. And in 2023, via this agreement, the township accessed $1.7 million from the agreement's near-term investment fund. And they used that for a few showy items, such as a fire truck, which drew lots of media attention, great for pictures. Another component of the funding, aside from those near-term investments, is the Community Wellbeing Fund, from which the township reportedly acquired playground equipment, a plow truck and a sander, a pickup truck, a compressor for the ice rink, and other goodies, which I'm very glad for the community of Ignace to have. It's just the purpose of all this largesse on behalf of the NWMO. That's what I question. And I've tried to cut down on screen images, but one that I was thinking of showing is a news article that had a picture of that fire truck for Ignace and a list of a number of the other things I've mentioned. The headline read, "Ignace buys a lot of things," with an exclamation mark. So I know reporters have to do balanced reporting, but sometimes their headlines give a little bit of attitude to the subject. But by our calculations, based on the township's financial documents that you can access online, by the end of 2022, the township of Ignace had received almost $10 million from the NWMO, and we could easily be missing some things in our calculations. The township spokesperson is quoted in one of the recent news stories as saying they expect to benefit from another 1.7 million in 2024, and that may be from the same multi-year funding agreement again. Of course, another thing Ignace is paying for currently with the funding is the consultation that I referred to in our last section. That being an obvious and legitimate use for these funds is for the township's expenses in dealing with this issue. And over to Dryden. Dryden hasn't been in the news as much as Ignace, but in last year's report, I mentioned they had just made an agreement, I think, to get $3.2 million in the spring of last year, just before our presentation. And in total, they've had over 4 million over the years. The NWMO seems to have ramped up its activity in Dryden in the last couple of years. And a Dryden councillor said recently, and this was dismaying, this points up how communities become dependent on these funds. The councillor said recently in a social media post that she felt it would be, quote, unfair to Dryden's taxpayers, unquote, to oppose the project or walk away from their agreements with the NWMO. And this, by the way, is a councillor who understands the issues around the DGR more than most. I mean, this is a councillor who really thinks. But so we're a bit, disappointed in that. But it demonstrates how the funding creates a sense of dependency and soon becomes what seems a necessary part of a municipality's yearly budget. And I personally think that's exactly what the NWMO intends.
Great, thanks, Wendy. Very thoughtful response. Bill, South Bruce, how do you see those budget lines showing up in the community?
Sure. There's a lot of similarities what's going on in Ignace area and Dryden to the funding approach. So NWMO has really segregated the funding into primarily three separate categories. It's for the expenses associated with the communication aspects of the project, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. They've also got the well-being fund and in the near-term investment fund. So up until the end of 2023, the number I believe that the South Bruce has received is $15 million. And the part of that goes to, as I mentioned, promotional material sent out to the households in South Bruce, trips to various nuclear facilities, communications efforts such as, a half-page colored weekly newspaper ad in the four newspapers that are in and around our community. Some lawyer fees to really respond to memorandum of understanding and drafting up this hosting agreement. The lawyer's fees can be quite extensive. And then for direct staff expenses within the municipality of the administration team. So there's about 7.5 million of the 15 million is spent in those categories. Currently, and I think this is different than what it is in Ignace, there are 3 dedicated employees fully paid for by the NWMO on the municipality staff, whose job responsibility is really directly tied to the NWMO project. And the funding for 2023 was approximately $2.5 million. As Wendy said, all of these funding agreements are totally available to the public. And if anybody wants to see the more details associated with them. The other half of the 15 million is allocated to the 2 categories I talked about, a well-being fund and a near-term investment fund. The well-being fund really has been in existence since 2012, when basically the project got started in South Bruce. And that's, as I said, existed over those years. And to date, I think, based on what I believe, it's about $3.5 million have been funded in that program. There's about 300 to 400,000 per year. And the fund's been used, similar to what Wendy's mentioned, for improvements to either the municipality buildings or the facilities in South Bruce, such as, a new washroom for the Teeswater Fire Hall and lighting improvements in the Belmore Center. The near-term investment fund is different in the sense that it has a limited life. So it's $4 million that's going to be spent over approximately 3 years. And it really is funding much larger projects, such as improvements to the sanitary sewers in Teeswater, improvements to the community center in Formosa, and fire truck also in Maumee. The funding for that is almost used up. So the 4 million, I think we're around 3.5 or 3.6 million. The interesting part about this is all of these projects and the expenditures associated must be approved by the NWMO before you proceed with the implementation. Now, you mentioned, well, what else is going on in South Bruce? Well, not only does South Bruce municipality place weekly ads in the 4 local newspapers, but the NWMO also has a colored half page in these local newspapers. These ads are promoting the idea that the NWMO has the safety of people and the environment front and center in their mission and their agenda. These ads do not mention that the only objective and mandate the NWMO has is to find a community willing to gamble that the project will bring economic growth and population growth for their community, and that's in return for accepting this highly radioactive and dangerous spent fuel. That will be a safety and environmental liability for thousands of years. So that's kind of our view of what's happening with the funding in South Bruce.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bill. So I do have a third question for Wendy and Bill. I'm going to ask you, what are you hearing is the greatest concern that you're hearing from people with respect to the NWMO project? But I'm not going to ask you it right now because we've all gone over our allotted time, but we've got a number of questions. I'm going to try to just run through our questions pretty quickly, and then we'll come back and we'll close off with that question to Wendy and Bill and a quick look at the webinars still to come. So Wendy and Bill, if you want to have a look at the Q&A as well, and we'll maybe try to share these out, although some of them I might try to just run through quickly. So the first one is Kim asking about the CNSC being paid for by the NWMO, and is it legal? And I assume so because they're doing it, but I don't know so, and I'm not a lawyer, and we do have a number of lawyers on the session. So maybe lawyers in the group, if you want to send any comments to us in follow-up, and we'll put a note together if anyone has any ideas about that. I think that it raises concerns about conflict of interest, and it raises concerns about the normalized relationships that get built between the CNSC and the licensee, or the future licensee in this case. But that is a concern we have with the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission more generally. But I think that I can't say for certain whether there's any illegality there. Wendy and Bill, I'm going to just ask you to jump in as we go through these. Wendy would like to answer the next question. The criteria for willingness spelled out in the materials, and from whom they think they require willingness. Wendy, over to you. Wendy, I think your mic is off. There you go.
Got it. Yeah, those are two important and related questions, and they really have separate answers. The criteria for establishing willingness is not spelled out in any NWMO materials because they leave that to the municipalities to decide on canvassing their constituents, etc. So that would be my answer to that, is certainly not in NWMO materials. And from whom they think they require willingness, that's more of an NWMO question. As we've discussed recently, much of these processes aren't subject to any legislation, so they're just sort of made up as the NWMO goes along. Ignace put up its hand as a community that was interested in learning more about being a host community. And as they are now one of the candidate host communities, NWMO looks to them for their consent. And NWMO also includes Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation, knowing that they certainly can't ignore the nearest Indigenous nation. So I hope that answers the questions, at least in part.
And I'll just add to that, Wendy, that I think the NWMO quite knowingly structured a siting process which did not define willingness or who would be declaring willingness. There were a number of, I think there were 2 different forums, they called them, or dialogues between 2007 and 2010. And there are a couple of others who were on this webinar who were also part of those sessions. And the NWMO was given clear advice on 2 counts. One, they had to define how they were going in advance They had to set out how they were going to determine willingness and what the thresholds would be. And they had to set out how they were going to define community. And the NWMO, when their siting document came out in 2010, showed a disregard for that advice, excellent advice, and purposefully left that out of their definitions for the siting process. Next question is Mary asking technical summary analysis of their studies as available in written form. I'm happy to share the slides. I did notice as we were talking through them, there were some typos in the slide where I was summarizing from the technical program annual report that used fuel packaging and used fuel transportation plant. I had swapped some of the acronyms, so I'll correct that and then happy to share with anyone who would like a copy of the slides. Next question is from Ole. Are there any licensing steps before NWMO and the operators of the Chalk River laboratories begin shipping white shell reactor fuel rods across Northern Ontario to the Ottawa Valley, such as a transport license from the CNSC? Yes, there is. There was an application submitted according to the technical report. There was an application submitted in 2023. And I can send you all the details of that. I can pull that out of the technical report, but there was an application submitted. I'm trying to recall the detail. I think it was an application for licensing of the container for a different purpose, but I'm not 100% recalling that detail, so I'll get that to you. A question from Nancy. Would you provide a link or tell us where we can find the documents showing NWMO pays the salary of the CNSC? Yes, I can do that. Perhaps what I'll do is I'll send a follow-up document to all the participants with things that people are requesting, so you don't have to request them individually. So yeah, I'll send that. It's I believe it's called the service agreement, and it's on the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission website. Another question from Ole. Was the NWMO decision to prioritize the Dryden Ignace area, the DGR, influenced by the CPR East-West rail line and the possibility of shipping high-level waste by rail? And when do you join in on this? My understanding is that the NWMO's initial development of a list was based on which municipalities put their hands up. And Ignace put their hands up first. Ignace put their hand up in 2009 before the siting process had been released, before the siting process had begun. They were flown to Toronto for a meeting with the NWMO in November 2009. And they have continued to show interest since that time. And I think that is the key criteria. I believe that the NWMO has applied. The fact that there's a rail connection close by may be a benefit because the NWMO, their reference case for transportation is by road, but they have not removed the possibility of shipping by rail. So we don't have any evidence that the CPR East-West line is a factor. We had the same question about some of the other communities that were on the CN line, but we don't have any definitive evidence of that.
Yeah, I agree on that too. That's all I've heard. If the presence of the rail line was a significant factor in Ignace being on the short list, it's certainly not part of a documented process, but one can see the benefit of the rail line being there.
Great, thanks, Wendy. Question from Lorraine. What are the treaties between Indigenous nations and the Crown in Dryden area and South Bruce? So the Northwest site, Wendy, why don't I pass this to you? I'm answering too many questions. Over to Wendy for that and Bill for the Southwest.
Yeah, I was just yeah, scanning down the list of questions. So what treaties between Indigenous nations and the Crown in Dryden? I don't have the map of the treaties before me, but the major treaty there is Treaty 3. And I don't think I have any more detail. You know, I could get balled up in the different treaty
Yeah.
organizations like Grand Council and NAN, but the treaty in that area is 3, I believe.
Yeah, so the rebel site is in the very heart of Treaty 3 territory. The
Mhm.
transportation route goes through Robinson Huron, Robinson Superior, and Anishinaabe Nation territory. Bill, over to you for South Bruce.
Yes, well, one of the things I should have covered as well when I was going through it, you know, even if South Bruce agrees to host this, Sun has still got a opportunity to vote, and they've been given the right from the OPG that they will be able to vote and decide whether or not they want this repository in their territory. So Sun will have a final word on whether or not this goes ahead in South Bruce.
Sun being Soggy Najibway.
Okay, you know, but yes.
Great, thanks, Wendy and Bill. Question from Mary. Does the NWMO say what will happen if neither potential site is willing?
Yeah, can I take that one, Brene?
Go ahead, Wendy.
It's interesting, Mary, because in the last year, a couple of NWMO reps have seemingly spontaneously answered that question without even being asked in interviews. So it kind of made us wonder if they fear that result. But the answer is that they would have to go right back to the drawing board with the site selection process. So go back and confer, and you know that could take some time, and then come back and start looking for another Canadian site. That's my understanding from what they say.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, Wendy, that when they were removing communities from their list, in several cases, Hornpain and Manitouwadge were two of the last to be removed before they went down to just the Rebel site and the Teeswater site. And in those cases, they simply suspended their work at this time. So they didn't say that they were off the list. They just said they were suspending studies at this time. So in some cases, in a small number of the communities, they actually gave a reason for not continuing. Scriber, they gave a reason. Aaron Eldersley, they gave a reason. But in some communities, they simply said we're suspending studies at this time. They also, in 2012, when they closed the list, they didn't close it. They suspended the list. They suspended the call for expressions of interest at that time. Bill, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? The next question is for you. So maybe we'll go.
We've heard the same thing that and I think I heard that from Liz Morton, that the process would just have to start over. Is their bottom line, and that's probably true, because you'd still have to go back to even those communities that not totally off the list, but you'd have to go back and get them reestablished.
Question for you, Bill, from Marty. South Bruce made a decision to run candidates for council in 2020 in an effort to take the pulse of the community. I believe those candidates were not elected. Does this impact your confidence in a positive vote as far as to not be willing? Tough question. Over to Bill.
Okay, absolutely not. The fact is, we ran candidates that were running against the incumbents, and it's a very tough job to win over the incumbents. They're people that are known, have been in council before, or supported by previous council members. So the election was interesting, but not what we consider a definitive point. And that's used often to say, well, you know, the election was all about one item. That's not true. The election was about getting a candidate you wanted in your council. And so absolutely not. We are still very comfortable that there are people, and I think even the recent discussion that the Mayor Getz had on January 9th with CBC, he said, you know, there's about some people on the for side, some people opposing, but there's a large chunk of people in the middle that haven't decided what they want to do. And I think that is true for everything. It's when you get down to the final strokes of deciding something, it's the undecided that makes the final roll over one way or the other.
Thanks, Bill. The next question I'm going to pass to Wendy, and the one after that will go to Bill. So, Wendy, both the speakers from South Bruce and Ignace don't currently reside in either community. Is it possible to have some representing the community that currently resides in the community that they are speaking about? And I would say yes, Melissa, it is possible, but I'm going to pass the question to Wendy.
Yeah, and I'm glad we got this question. It's a question we ask ourselves, and it would be lovely to have someone from right near the repository site be one of our speakers, and they're welcome to if anybody would like to. I'm from outside Thunder Bay, and I know I'm talking for the Northwestern Ontario region in the issues we discuss. So it's not just Ignace, but you know, our core groups tend to be a little bit on the small side. We don't have, everybody doesn't want to be a speaker on a webinar, so we haven't been able to draw someone from the Ignace Dryden area yet, but on a future occasion we just very well might. We have many friends in those areas that inform our discussions. So, and I'll let Bill talk about his situation vis-a-vis South Bruce and where he lives.
Sure. Well, I live in Ottawa. I moved here a couple of years ago from South Bruce. So I started this activity when I was in South Bruce, and I lived in South Bruce for 15 years. So I'm very familiar with the community, and given that it was such an important activity, I decided to stay on. But I'm not the only speaker from our group. Each and every one of them have an opportunity to speak, and they do. So yes, I'm not located in South Bruce, but that doesn't mean I don't believe this project is a good thing for any region, whether it's Ignace or South Bruce. Doesn't matter to me. It's something that is not good, and it has huge liabilities, and it's solving really not the residents' problem, is solving a problem that the nuclear industry has. And they're going about it in a way that they're putting money, and they're very good and very slick marketing group, the NWMO, and I give them credit for that. But the fact is, it's a bad idea.
Well, and I'll just add to that answer, Melissa. Maybe the problem is that Bill and Wendy did a really good job last year. So when organizing the webinar this year, I canvassed the groups, and we have 3 groups in the Ignace area and a lot of involved, active people living closer to the site than Ignace. And they said, Wendy should do it. So Wendy did it. It's not a case of not having others who are willing. It's a case of they were very confident, and they liked the way Wendy approached last year. And she is in regular communication with the groups and the individuals surrounding the site. And the same case with Bill. I canvassed to protect our waterways active members, the board of directors, and they said they would like Bill to do it. So, but I hear you, and maybe what we need to do is have a panel with a number of representatives, so the local people can have their favorite spokespeople, but we can hear from others as well. I guess I would then think that there'd be a question in the Revel area. Are we talking about then, Melissa, whether you think that has to be someone from Ignace, or is it someone who is from actually living in close proximity to the site? Because those are 2 different things. Bill, next question is for you. It was reported recently, this is a question from Anna, reported recently that Saugeen Ojibwe Nation will hold a referendum on the NWMO DGR. before the end of 2024. Do you have any more info on that? Any insights?
No, I do not. That would be interesting, but I do not have any information about that.
Great. Thanks, Bill. Question from Al. We're doing great work. What other organizations are taking an interest in helping you all solve this railroading and gerrymandering operation? And maybe I'll have Wendy and Bill speak really briefly to others that they're involved in. I know they're both active with other groups in the area, and I'll speak to a more provincial and national. Wendy, Bill, Grenade, we'll try to go quickly.
Okay, yeah. You might know this, Cal, because I know you're on social media. We, the Nuclear Free North, who I'm representing here tonight, is an alliance of many other groups. There's Nuclear Free Thunder Bay, No Nuclear Waste in Northwestern Ontario up in Dryden, Sunset Country Spirit Alliance also up in the Dryden area, No Can Do in Sioux Lookout. I'm probably forgetting a few, but there are many organizations associated with us who are on this cause pretty much exclusively. There's also Environment North in the Thunder Bay area, and they cover many environmental causes, but the nuclear is one of their major causes at the moment. So we're drawing from a significant volunteer base with all of these organizations, but they all represent particular concerns in their area. Environment North's concern is more of an overriding environmental concern. The groups in Dryden are more concerned for the effects on the populations in those areas. And we also have support from individuals in many communities in Northwestern Ontario that all join up with us and support us in any way they can. So we feel very supported and lucky in that regard. None of us are going it alone in any way.
Great. Thanks, Wendy. And over to you, Bill, and then I'll add quickly and move on.
Okay, well, we don't really have the luxury that Wendy has just talked about, a number of groups that support us in South Bruce, but we do have a lot of individuals in and around South Bruce that are very supportive of helping us win this battle. But no real identified other groups other than those that we work with across other agenda items, but nobody really specifically on the issue of DGR in South Bruce.
Great. Thanks, Bill. And provincially and nationally, there's actually a large network of groups, nuclear, often convened through Nuclear Waste Watch. And over the years, there's a number of statements have been made by Nuclear Waste Watch on a sign-on basis with, a large collection of groups, and there's a number of them who remain supportive and active. So if you check out nuclearwastewatch.ca, you'll see, go to some of the earlier documents, the founding documents, and you'll see some of those organizations. But there is, at the national level, I think, and a provincial level, I think the larger organizations are supportive, but are looking to groups like Northwatch. We're part of We the Nuclear Free North, and Protect Our Waterways to really do the lead. And we look to them and ask for their support on a regular basis. I'm seeing that we're getting more and more questions, but it's 8:42. So I'm going to speed through some of these. A question from Sandy about what public education our groups are planning to carry out in the coming time. And Wendy and Sandy, I'm actually going to suggest that you sign up to the newsletters. I'm going to put up the website at the end of this site. And if you sign up for the newsletters, I think that's the most expedient way to respond to your question, because I think between Bill, Wendy, and I, we could take up quite a long time with that. Lorraine's suggesting why not use the Referendum Act of Canada as a template. I'm going to refer that back to Bill and Wendy for consideration. Question from Sandy. Do either of our groups know whether Saugeen Ojibwe Nation or Wabigon Lake Ojibwe Nation after writing private contracts, have their open vote. No, I think we're gonna just leave that one, Sandy. We don't know the details of the decision-making process in either of those communities, and I think it's really not our place to be disclosing that on their behalf. Question from Jody. Any idea when the decisions will be made in Ignos, Wabigoon, South Bruce? What will South Bruce have? When will South Bruce have their referendum and announce it? And I think I'm going to give it very quickly to Bill for South Bruce. This is on timing of the decision, and then over to Wendy for Ignos.
As I mentioned earlier, it would be sometime in the latter part of 2024. It's a question of the process by Ontario, how a by-election can be held. And so you need, after a municipality approves a bylaw to have a by-election, you have to wait 180 days before you can actually hold a referendum. So that's kind of the procedure from Ontario, kind of overrides anything else that you might want to do.
Great, thanks. Wendy.
Yeah, well, we know the NWMO has said that their siting decision is to be made in 2024, so we just work backwards from that. I know Ignac's process with consulting the citizens through that consultant firm. The last questions are asked of the residents in March, but then the consultants have to put together the report and council will have to review it. So how long it takes that process to grind along, I'm not sure, but we're still expecting a decision to come from Ignace in 2024. Wabigoon, I don't know. I presume it would be driven by the same NWMO dates, but I'm not sure.
Great. Thanks, Wendy. Question from Mary. Does anyone know if NWMO has established a draft host agreement with Ignace and Wabigoon Lake First Nation? Well, we do have some staff from Ignace and NWMO in Ignace on the line, but we don't have the ability to elevate them to answer that. And there's been nothing disclosed in the public record on that. All we've seen is the funding agreements being referred to in council sessions. A question from Angela. What did the speakers propose as an alternative to the NWMO's DGR proposal, which is a wonderful segue to our final slide, where we will be looking at webinars to come. And our webinar next week is on securing our future, a risk-reduced approach to radioactive waste management in the long term. So come back next week for that conversation. Question from Faye. How much compensation has been offered to a host community? I don't think we have knowledge of a compensation package post signing. Wendy or Bill, do you have knowledge of a promise of compensation post signing?
No, I think I would notice that, but I don't think I've seen anything like that.
No. And for us, I think what the compensation would be for accepting the waste in South Bruce would hopefully be spelled out in the draft agreement, which should be the draft hosting agreement should be available by the end of February or early March.
Great. Thanks, Bill. And a comment, not a question, from Melissa, that she would propose that it would be someone from Ignace would be our panelist. So I think that would exclude the people closest to the site in the case of the northwestern location. But thanks for that comment back, Melissa. For next year's planning, we'll certainly take that into account. A question about support from Council of Canadians. Yes, Council of Canadians has been very active on nuclear waste, radioactive waste as an issue. And while they aren't actively campaigning at this point on the Deep Geological Repository, they have expressed support. Question from Ken. Any mention of new waste sites in New Brunswick? with the start of New Brunswick's small modular reactor project. So there's a whole track of new waste types and forms, from the small modular reactors being proposed for New Brunswick, being proposed and now pursued at the Darlington site, BWRX 300, and the micromodular reactor at Chalk River. The NWMO concepts don't accommodate those wastes in their design, but the NWMO has said that they will accommodate those wastes. So no details actually yet provided by the NWMO on how they would do that. I'm sorry, my answer machine's going in the background. And a question from Elizabeth. Besides this site, has there been other sites not too controversial that are being looked at, or is this the only one? So there are 2 sites now. The NWMO shortlisted from 22 potential municipalities, because at least in the case of Northern Ontario, the municipalities who expressed interest were all some distance. Manitouwadge was fairly close, but they were all of the candidate sites were outside of the municipal boundaries. But no, there are not, to our knowledge, any other sites that would not have been controversial. Every community that the NWMO had on their list, all 22 communities were the site of opposition, and all the sites were controversial. So no, there weren't any, I think, that were controversy free. It's getting late. Susan has entered a clarification about the SMR project in New Brunswick hasn't started. That's true. The ones it's being promoted, the one in Darlington and the Chalk River site are being pursued, in that they are in early stages of an impact assessment or licensing process. So that was a lot of questions, and thank you. We've lost a lot of people as we went through them, understandably. Wendy, your hand is up. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add to the answer to one of the questions I answered. I think it was Cal who had asked whether other organizations were supporting us, and I was racking my brain not to forget some, but there's also a small group forming up in Ignace as well, of people that oppose this, and we have their support and their information on their concerns. So more jumping on all the time, to tell you the truth.
Great. Thank you. And our last question, and I'm going to post this to Bill and Wendy as I move to our final slide, so that you can make note of the upcoming sessions. But Bill and Wendy, what is the biggest concern that you're hearing from residents in your region about the NWMO's project and presence in your region? Bill and Wendy.
Shall I jump in?
Yes, please, do go.
Grabbed up my notes here. The biggest concerns in our region, I'm going to list 2. It's hard to rank them, but sorry, I'm playing with my paperwork here. Here we go. The biggest concern, I'd say, is the transportation concern. That's the one that you see a lot of letters to the editor, that when we're out in the community talking to people, as I said on my first slide, when you talk about the transportation distances, people are just wowed by those distances and the dangers they engender. And highway transport in particular, but rail transport is also included in the concerns. This differs a bit from Southern Ontario, which has its own hazards for sure, but in winter conditions, the stretch of the Trans-Canada Highway that traverses the north shore of Lake Superior, along with the really treacherous stretch between Thunder Bay and Ignace, is really top of mind for many people, and even in summer conditions. the proportion of transport truck collisions and the raw number of such collisions is steadily increasing, and it was already higher than people realized. From 2015 to 2020, so in that 5-year period, there were 367 transport truck collisions just in the stretch between Thunder Bay and Ignace. That's a roughly 200-kilometer stretch. And rail transport is also questioned because derailments are disturbingly frequent, and climate change in various ways is causing that incidence to go up with the rail. And I'll just throw in one more concern, and this came to the fore just in the last couple of weeks, and that is seismic activity in our area. And I'll just pop up one last slide, if I can get it to share properly in a pinch. And let me know if you're seeing it. I don't think I'm in presentation view anymore.
We're seeing it, not in slide mode, but that's okay.
You can see it, yeah. Just to orient you, that's the big part of Ontario, the northern part. At the bottom, you've got Lake Superior there. There's been media coverage of an unusually large, about 2 weeks ago, magnitude 2.7 earthquake, and it was only 20 kilometers from the repository site, the proposed site. So that's the little purple dot there, just to show you that one. But what this map represents is 40 years worth of data on earthquakes in Northern Ontario, and you can see that there's a cluster down here. And that concerned me just when I pulled that up because of the recent incident. That's from Natural Resources Canada's site, Earthquakes Canada. So that's with their seismic data. So that's one of the concerns, although all of these quakes in this map are small magnitude. When we cracked the books to review seismic data about the area in response to these events and refreshed our memories, there is what Natural Resources Canada calls, and they call it this, it's an earthquake swarm right in the Ignace Dryden area where the repository could potentially be sited. Even though these are all small quakes on the map, they're disturbing for a couple of reasons. One is seismic experts state that, of course, it's impossible to tell if small earthquakes are in fact foreshocks because we don't have a crystal ball. But experts do tell us that although statistics have only been kept in our area, northwestern Ontario, for about 40 years, in other areas with longer records, a correlation is routinely seen between frequent smaller quakes and the likelihood of occurrence of larger quakes. And the second point of concern is simply that data gathered in the last 20 years specifically has indicated that, contrary to earlier theory, the majority of these small quakes in northwestern Ontario occur at a depth of less than 5 kilometers. Previously, they thought they were around 20 kilometers deep. And most of this group are actually at a depth of less than 3 kilometers down. So the implications for potentially damaging man-made structures at or near the surface, including the DGR, are that much greater. So that just makes you think. So I'll stop my share. So those are two big concerns: transportation and seismic activity.
Great. Thanks very much, Wendy. Bill, you're under the gun. We're at 8:56.
Well, I think this is very,
yeah,
this is a very important area, and we should have spent more time with it. But again, as Wendy said, the question, what is the resident? You can't point to one thing and say that's it. There's just too many unknowns associated with this project. But we're in an area that is close to communities such as Teeswater, being 2 kilometers away. And also we're in an area where there's a lot of water, direct water supplies, whether it's aquifers that are there that supply the drinking water for all of the South Bruce and the river that runs right through the middle of it. So there are a number of experts that say, you shouldn't put a repository somewhere near where there's a lot of water source. But a high number of residents demand an ironclad commitment that the drinking water for their families and their farming needs will not be polluted because of this project. And when these safety barriers break down over time, and they will, it will be too late to fix this problem, and our freshwater supply will just be a memory. Also, the climate changes that cause flash flooding may well become a common occurrence. And this raises a concern that the runoff from the excavated rock pile that's going to be at the site, as well as the ponds that are there, will actually contaminate the Teeswater River. The next biggest concern that they had was that the dangers associated with the above ground processing facility, the repackaging operation, they call it. This is an area where there's little information being provided by the NWMO regarding the safety of this operation. It's also the area that NWMO reports that this will be the highest location on the site for radiation being emitted into the biosphere. And that conclusion doesn't surprise us, as the operation consists of opening up long-term containers that were in the old storage site to get access to these old fuel bundles that have been stored for 30 to 40 years. The condition of these fuel bundles is unknown, and they must be fitted into a new container for replacement in one of the DGR cavities. All of this effort is being performed using robots operated by humans who are located behind three feet of protective glass. So the degree of protection emphasizes that this used spent fuel is extremely dangerous. The other aspect with this kind of an operation, the human and mechanical error is high. And that's not what we need to see in this kind of situation. So that there are a couple of others here, and I'll just talk very briefly about them. But you know, this is a farming community, and agriculture is the largest single employee in the area, and the residents are worried about the stigma that might have, you know, having a South Bruce address, the nuclear waste capital of Canada, and that could devalue their products and property value. And whether it's a milk production, cash crops, food, buyers have choices, and they may not want to purchase products that are produced near a nuclear facility. Others are concerned about the possible impacts that will be introduced, not only from the radiation emissions from the operating such a facility, but also from the disruption the project will introduce to their daily way of life. And you know, this is a nice, quiet community, and we're going to see tremendous amount of traffic over the roads, whether it's commuters coming to the work site, and that's going to change forever the country lifestyle that we've enjoyed here in South Bruce. And those living near the proposed area are going to encounter the biggest disruption to their way of life. And there are a lot of people on farms right adjacent to the proposed site, and they're going to suffer benefits without any, or suffer impacts without any benefits. And our past mayor once said, "Oh, few will have to suffer for the good of all." And my last comment is the concern about the project itself. It's always in a state of change. And I guess that's the rationale for the NWMO to call the project adaptive. Whether it's the volume of spent fuel bundles to be placed in the DGR, we don't know. The type of spent fuel from the various SMR reactor designs, again, we don't know. The design of the containers associated with those SMR reactors, we don't know. The areas required to handle the volume, unknown. The radiation emissions expected, not known. Duration of the project, don't know. And the last unknown, there's no guarantee that this waste sent to a DGR will be only from Canada. You know, the NWMO does not have the authority to make that decision. So those are the big issues for us here in South Bruce.
Thank you very much, Bill. An excellent summary. And I think those concerns go across the board with this project. So thank you both, Bill and Wendy. You've been great. And thank you to all the participants. I'm really happy to see that most of you hung in, even though we went a full 2 hours. So thank you so much. And I will send a follow-up email with some of the items, links, and documents that people requested. I'll just send it to everybody. And also a reminder about our upcoming webinars. This is the first in our series of 4 this February. So thank you very much. And I hope to be back with you all online again next week.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanks for all the little hearts and thumbs up I see floating on my screen.
Right.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Night, night.